Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Foods of the Future. My name is Marie Pareto-Hedin, and I am the president of the Tufts Senior Connection, a shared interest group sponsored by the Tufts University Office of Alumni Engagement. We design programs that we hope will be of special interest to alums ages 55 and older, but we welcome persons of all ages who find our programs relevant, intriguing, or both. Growing populations and changing climate are pressuring the discovery of alternative sources of food. Today's speaker and his team of researchers are meeting this challenge head on. David Kaplan is the Stern Family Endowed Professor of Engineering at Tufts University, a distinguished university professor, and a professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. He directs the National Institute for Cellular Agriculture, funded by the USDA, as well as the Tufts University Center for Cellular Agriculture. He is the editor-in-chief of ACS Biomaterials Science and Engineering, and he serves on many editorial boards and programs for journals and universities. He has received awards for his research and teaching, and he is a fellow in the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering, the National Academy of Inventors, and the National Academy of Engineering. If you have a question for Professor Kaplan, please enter it in the Q&A box. We will try to answer as many questions as possible at the conclusion of the formal presentation. Thank you, David, for speaking to us this evening.
Thank you very much, Marie, for that gracious introduction, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time to join us for this chat about future food. Let me share my I need to share my slides. So Rachel, I think you can facilitate. I'm not able to do it from my computer.
You can share your slides.
Oh, great. There we go. Thank you. All right. Hopefully everyone can see the slide. So for the time we have this evening, I want to just give you a glimpse into the programs we're running through Tufts regarding future foods, as I call them, and really our focus is on what we term cellular agriculture. And I want to start off, and there's clearly websites and emails there if you would like to follow up. And also, please, as mentioned by Marie, add questions to the chat, and happy to address those at the end. But if you're not aware of this field at all, this is the term we like to call this, think about this as the breweries of the future, and this is the future for food. So this will be sort of approaches to generate meats, seafoods, and other sort of foods we're used to, but to do it in a way that essentially removes animals from the equation. So it's almost a complete rethinking of how we make our food and what that food can offer us as part of that rethinking of the process. So that's what I want to convey today. And I'll start with a cartoon to hopefully ease the audience into what this all means. But essentially what we do in this field is we take what's called a tissue engineering approach. So we start with an animal on the left, here a cow, but it could be any animal that you'd like. And we use a biopsy punch to take a sample of muscle tissue or fat tissue from the animal. And that's it for the animal. We will never need the animal again in the process that we're talking about. Those cells are then isolated as we move from left to right on the screen. And we retrieve usually stem cells to eventually form muscle tissue, or stem cells to form fat tissue, or in some cases, connective tissue. And then in the middle of the cartoon, we grow lots and lots of those cells. So we have enough to create the food we're trying to make. And then towards the right, we then use usually plant-based materials, as we call them scaffolding, but substrates onto which we put the animal cells that we've grown up in our bioreactors in the middle. And we create products that look and taste like foods you're used to all the way on the right-hand side. So it's a combination of cell culture, a very traditional biotechnology approach, with plant-based materials to give texture, shape, and sort of size to the foods we're making. So that's what we're talking about in our time together this evening. So the first question you might ask me is, well, Dave, why are we bothering to do all this, right? I mean, that's a lot of that. This slide is a lot of work from a science technology standpoint to get to work efficiently, cost effectively, and very, very well. And that's where we're spending all of our time. And the question is, why bother? And the answer is on this slide in part. We're facing up to 10 billion people on the planet in the next 25 years or so. That's 2 billion more people than currently is on the planet. And there's simply not enough resources on the planet to handle, that level of increase, 25% increase in population, the way we make foods today. There are just not enough resources, land, water, energy to do it. And that comes from our own US Department of Agriculture. They're the ones who are telling us this. So we're no longer on the left-hand side where we have this idyllic family farm with animals grazing. We can produce food to feed the world. We're faced with what you see on the right, which is more factory farming. That's really where we stand today to feed the people we feed today. And why is that a problem? It offers a lot of good food sustenance for a lot of people, but at the same time, it comes with a lot of challenges. One, I listed a few here. One is just the rampant use of antibiotics and hormones and other drugs. Roughly 80% of all antibiotic use on the planet goes to just keep animals from getting too sick on these very dense factory farms. These farms and also the processing plants that go with them are the sources of many diseases that get transmitted. And those of you who remember already the COVID days, the first hotspots were all at pork processing plants and other processing plants for meat. So these are sort of concentrated areas where diseases can be rampant if we're not careful. Number three, a lot of concern about animal welfare when they're housed in such tight spots. And so ways to do better here is something that a lot of our students are very motivated by. And for me, my biggest motivation is the last one, which is not only improving sustainability with future foods and how we can do it different and better, but really improving food quality, food nutrition, and food safety overall. So these are the brief things I want to convey to you in our time, and then obviously answer questions if you have them. So this is what I mentioned already. This is from our Department of Agriculture to feed this growing population on the planet. Huge amounts of additional food need to be produced, lots more water, lots more energy, and our system in place today, supported by the Department of Agriculture, cannot meet these future demands. So we need innovation, we need alternatives, and we need to supply this to various populations over the next 20 years. So the other question you should say, well, Dave, that's great. We should just have people eat less animal meat, right? Because if we could reduce the consumption of meat, then this wouldn't be an acute problem. And the answer to that is it's been tried and it's failed miserably. You can see the chart on the slide here. The consumption of meat worldwide continues to grow at really, really high rates. It's not been abated at all. And these consumption rates apply worldwide as countries become more economically viable. They certainly turn to increasing their consumption of meat, as well as what happens here in the US. So using consumer campaigns to reduce consumption of these protein-rich foods has not worked, and the anticipation is it's not going to be a viable answer. So we need innovation in our food alternatives to meet the growing demand into the future. So the first thing you may be familiar with is what's on this slide, right? These are available commercially, for the most part, still Impossible Burgers in places like Burger King, and chicken nuggets at KFC, if you will, that are available. These are plant-based meat substitutes. This is not what I'm talking about today. So these are just plant residues that are used to make meat-like structures, some of which are pretty good, but some of which have a lot of challenges still ahead. And the cartoon to explain this process is here. Excuse me. On the left-hand side, we take a plant source here with corn, but it could be soybean, it could be peanuts, it could be others. We take that material, we isolate specific parts of the plant, and then we take those parts and run them through the center, which is called an extruder, where you mush together the plant parts and extrude out structural. Okay, I think we're back. I don't know where I got cut off, so hopefully we can pick it up where I think I left off, but please jump in if I missed something. Hopefully we're back online okay. Not sure what happened, but anyway. So back to what I told you before about plant-based meats and products like these. This is the process we go through. Good point, volume production. They're available in almost everywhere you look. The downside to these products are they're very, very over-processed, and many consumers don't want over-processed foods. And number two, nutritional content has a lot to be left in terms of meeting the needs because of the way these products are produced. So there's a lot of sort of space to fill in quality foods that consumers want by improving on what you see on this slide with plant-based products. Taste, cost, and nutrition are lacking here. And you know these, again, there's different ingredients like the Impossible Burger and many others. So the other example is this, and this is an example not plant-based and not what we're talking about today per se, but this is what we call alternative proteins. And a good example is this one. This is animal-free milk. And so the idea here is to make products like dairy that come animal-free, so non-cow derived. And to do that, the process cartoon-wise is to take your favored gene that encodes the alternative protein of interest, that's cloned into a suitable host system, like a bacterium or yeast or fungus. We then scale up the host, produce the product, purify the product, and add it into things like cheeses, yogurt, milk to make animal-free dairy products. Again, this works very, very well, but the same problem persists. The cost is way too high, so we need to do better and better. So what I want to talk about is really the world of cellular agriculture, essentially using animal cells to make food products. Not that different than what you're already consuming. Things like cheeses, breads, beer, where you use certain animals or certain cells in the production process for these foods that you're used to and probably consume fairly regularly. And so again, the process we've gone through is here. Here, the difference is we're using cells in the foods we're making. When I talked about plant-based foods, there were no cells, just plant material. When I talked about alternative proteins, cells are only used to produce the product, the proteins, but the cells don't go into the food. And why do we think we need cells in our future foods? Because that's where the nutrition, that's where the taste, that's where the flavor all comes from. So if we can add cells into those plant-based foods, we should elevate consumer acceptance, elevate nutrition, elevate taste, and therefore make products that the consumer will want to purchase. And these are things then that will be animal-free in origin and healthier and quality for the consumer. So that's the sort of vision for this field as we go forward. So the question should be, how does it taste? And the answer is it tastes pretty darn good. Okay, I and many of my students have been able to go around to some of the companies that are already making some of these products, the majority of which are on the West Coast right now, but we're trying to build an infrastructure here on the East Coast and near Tufts to do this locally. But I've tasted, for example, on the left, Wild Type is the company in San Francisco that makes cell-cultivated salmon fillets. You could see that there. It looks the same as the salmon you would buy in a store, and it tastes very, very good. In the middle is cultivated chicken meat that's used to produce products as well, and again, tastes as good. And on the right, Mission Barns is a company that uses pork fat cells, cultivated the way we're talking about, to make things like animal-free bacon, sausages, and meatballs. So we have tasted all these, and they're all really, really good. That's the good side. The downside is they're only available in very small quantities to date, served in restaurants to get consumers more exposed to these. I think what you'll find now is all three of these companies have now received Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration approval to sell their products in the US. And so I think you'll start to see these companies scaling up and making more of these foods available for consumer trial. And you can already buy these foods in Singapore. So they were the first, Singapore was the first country to approve commercial sale of cultivated meat. Here you could buy cultivated chicken cell nuggets. I've been to Singapore recently. We purchased some in the market as well. So these are becoming available, not quickly, but they're slowly becoming accessible to different populations. The reason why Singapore has been kind of first in line for this, as well as a few other countries, is really because of food security. Because Singapore imports about 95% of all their food, they've invested heavily with public funding to support the development of alternative foods like these cultivated chicken nuggets, as well as others, and there's a few other countries around the world like this. We are hoping to continue to encourage the US government to invest heavily in this space, not only for food security reasons, but also for the reasons we talked about earlier regarding food quality, food safety, food nutrition, and many other topics that we mentioned. So if you've never seen what this looks like, I just wanted to show you an example. So we went out to our School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts. We harvested cells with a biopsy punch from a cow, brought those cells back to the laboratory, which is what you see on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side is what they look like when we grow them in the lab. And at the bottom right is a muscle fiber bundle made from these cells. And it looks the same as you would see in a muscle fiber bundle that came directly from the cow muscle. Instead, in this case, we grew it in a laboratory setting. So the point of this slide is to say the technology is here to do this. It works. The challenge is, how do we scale it up and do it in a cost-effective way so it becomes really a suitable alternative for consumers? And we have a ways to go there, but that's kind of the message with this slide. We can do the same thing for fat. So you could see a plastic dish on the left-hand side, and these are pork isolated fat cells, stem cells that we grow in culture. And you can see it kind of looks opalescent almost on the left. Those are just fat cells that cover the entire plastic dish. And if we scrape all those cells together, you could see it in the yellow circle on the right. There's a blob of white fluffy material. That's pure pork fat that we've grown in the laboratory. The point is, it works for fat, it works for muscle. It's just a matter of optimization, scaling, and keeping the cost effective. I'll talk in a minute about what we've done here. For example, for the students, what we're allowed to do is we could cook this pork fat and we could smell it and ask the question, does it smell like the real thing? And I'll tell you the punchline, the answer is yes. And so it's a new way to make pork fat without the animal, and yet it is kind of smells the same, cooks the same, and these are the goals for this kind of program. Excuse me. So one of the challenges for cost is what we grow the cells in. We need a lot of expensive components like serum and like growth factors that raise the cost too much to make it a viable strategy for producing this food. So our mandates here are to remove animal components from the process and keep the cost down. And to show you how far we've come, to give you sort of the optimistic view, the first cultivated cell-based hamburger was introduced in 2013, so about 12 years ago. And this was from a colleague in the Netherlands who demonstrated this production from cow cells. This is where the field really started. 12 years later, we've gone from 2013, where it cost roughly $300,000 to produce this hamburger. And if you prorate the weight of the hamburger, it was about $1 million for this hamburger. Today, we've gone from that amount, which is about $1 million, per pound of hamburger, down to somewhere between $10 and $50 per pound to make the same product. So in 12 years, we've reduced the cost 5 orders of magnitude just by doing some research and related sort of activities. So we're on the right trajectory. Any new technology starts out very expensive. With scale, with research, the cost comes down, and you see that here. And so these are projections, $10 to $50 a pound from different companies and labs around the world. In our own lab here at Tufts, you could see the trajectory just from our own research that's all published. Excuse me, I just need to take a drink of water. So roughly 5-6 years ago, when we started this project, we were roughly $200 for the growth media to grow the cells from the cow, and that was per liter of growth media. And you need many, many liters, right? Today, we're down to roughly $15 to $20 a pound just from our own research. So already that's, orders of magnitude reduction, and the projections are we and others will get down to below $1 a liter. Once we're below $1 a liter, we can easily compete with current livestock-derived foods. So that's the goal. Again, the biggest challenge ahead that I like to talk about is scaling. So again, here you see a muscle fiber in the middle that we grew in the laboratory. Looks as good as any muscle fiber you'll collect from a livestock animal like a cow itself, but it's nowhere near what you see on the left, growing a steak for somebody to cook and eat. Right on the middle here, we're only at a couple of hundred microns across, whereas the steak is obviously inches, if not larger across. So we have a long way to go. Apologies for my throat today. So how do we get there? A lot of people look to the pharmaceutical world to try and use technology developed that's used to produce our drugs that we use today. In our mind, in our program, this is really not a viable option because the cost to produce pharmaceuticals is essentially a non-issue because you're producing small amounts of materials, so high production costs can be sort of alleviated through the scaling that you're using. And food production is just the opposite of pharmaceutical production. Food production needs very, very high volumes and very, very low cost, whereas pharma produces very, very low volumes of drugs at very, very high cost. So I think this is really not going to be a strong sort of direction to go in the future. We will see. In our own program at Tufts, what we do is look for innovation in scale-up. So we move away from traditional tanks like you see in pharma or in beer brewing or in cheese making, and we go to things like you see at the bottom. We look at novel ideas like fiber-based food production, which I'll show you in a minute, or film-based food production, or sponges. And these are all active areas of research in the program. And to give you a sense for the fiber-based system, It's essentially, think about textile engineering for your future food. And so that's the kind of vision I want you to think about with this, but doing it again without the animal involved, right? And so the idea is very simple. We look at the process we're using now, and we can show we can use edible fibers and grow our muscle cells and our fat cells on there. And then we go through traditional textile engineering, making yarns so you can make very dense meat structures, knitting, weaving, spooling, so we create larger amounts of foods into the future. We really like this approach because it's scalable, it's modular, it can be automated, and you can make dense foods like pork chops and steaks if you carry out the process correctly. Again, as I said before, the technology works. It's not a question of whether this works. The question is, how do we scale it, automate it, and engineer it in a way that makes it cost effective for consumers? So that's part of the ongoing research right now. I mentioned earlier, just to start to finish up, the ability to check what we make in the lab to make sure it smells correct. And this is data just to say with our consumer panels, which are our students in the programs, we can look biochemically at what the volatiles are, the things you smell when you cook the pork fat, what those are and how those compare to traditional pork fat. And they're basically indistinguishable when we do this, which is a great sign. You can grow animal fat or animal muscle without the animal and still get the flavors and tastes that you want consumers to receive. We are awaiting approval to do the actual taste testing. I mentioned earlier, we've taste tested lots of products at the companies, but at the university, we have to get proper approval to do that. And we're in the middle of getting that approval. So maybe next time I talk to you, I'll show you the results of those taste testings. I want to close with what the future looks like, and I think some highlights to tell you about, and then I'll just quickly go through a few slides. One is, if you follow the technology that I'm talking about this evening, this means that you're not limited to foods from animals that are traditionally domesticated for livestock, cows, chickens, turkeys, pigs, and so on, or fish, the usual fish that are farmed or collected in the wild. Here, as long as you can find an animal, you can isolate cells and grow food from that animal. So this opens up our palates in ways we've never been able to think about, because you can make foods from any organism on the planet using the technology we're talking about. So this is a game changer for future foods and what they're going to taste like, be like, and so on. I think we're at the beginning of using food approaches like future foods we're talking about for improved therapeutic or metabolic enhancement. And we've already done a little bit of this, but you could start thinking about consuming foods that help your metabolic state. And it can be tailored to your state of life, whether you're active as an athlete, whether you want to be able to focus on reading longer, whether you want to have improved gut health. So many of these things can be engineered into foods today. This is one of the goals. So we get to personalize foods just like personalized medicines. And the other point here is to make food fun. So not only can you do bread making at home and cooking at home with the family or friends, you could also literally create your food at the same time. So I think in the future, you'll see bread making machines that are now food making machines to grow meats and other protein rich products. So this is kind of a view to the future. This is what I talked about. We're no longer limited to a few species. You can pick anything on the planet to carry out this process. You can do things you can't do with livestock. For example, we've shown we take our cow cells, the muscle cells, and we can use genetic tools to implant in those cells vitamin A that comes from the carrot. And so now you have antioxidant, vitamin-enriched beef. And this is very useful because it means the beef is more stable when it's raw on the shelf, so healthier for you. And it's more stable when you cook it and consume it because you'll have more antioxidant for gut health. So if you're going to go with genetically modified foods, this is a good opportunity. lots of challenges. I want to end on this, and that is, I think the bigger picture is kind of summarized here on one more slide. If we look at livestock production of meat and food versus what we're talking about today, cellular agriculture. So livestock factory farming versus cell ag. It's night and day what the potential is to help our consumption, help the planet, help our health and nutrition by using this kind of alternative food approach. Just based on time, it takes a long time, for example, for a cow to be grown and be matured to produce meat, roughly 2 years. Whereas in literally days, we could go from the cell isolations to making meat in a production facility with cellular agricultural approaches. So we save years. So the life cycle goes much lower by using cells for the production process. So this is a game changer, number one. We can improve food quality faster, nutrition and sensory features faster, and food safety features faster, because these are well-contained production processes as opposed to livestock that is much more sort of in the open environment and leads to a lot more issues like we talked about earlier. So many compelling reasons why this is an important technology as an alternative to livestock foods going forward. This is not even to mention of the livestock food production. More than 50% of the cow is not used for food, whereas for cells, almost all of it is used for food. So efficiency, again, becomes paramount here. I think if we do this right, we can do a lot of things better, like enhance the flavor of foods or bring new flavors, improve stability of foods so we don't have as much waste. You could think about allergen-free meats as opposed to what we have today, gut health and so on, nutritional content, and things that we mentioned before. But all these become feasible because of the technology we're talking about here. And what this leads to is the potential to really do better for our lifespan and the quality of life that we have. Because today, if you all follow the charts, using current foods, life expectancy, at least in the US, has been going down, not going up. And many would argue that's because of the foods and the quality foods we're eating are becoming more and more overprocessed, more and more challenges ahead with safety and quality that we haven't attended to with the current technology. With what we're talking about today, this projection should go up. That's what you see at the top right with cellular agriculture. So that's where we see the real benefits long-term for shifting some of our production towards a biotechnology approach for food. Let me close by just saying at Tufts, we have a very comprehensive program on this topic. So happy to answer questions on this or with follow-ups if you have interest in what the academic program is, our Institute for Cell Ag, our industrial consortium, and what we're doing for commercialization. And let me close just by acknowledging my amazing team of students that work throughout the university. We have support from the Department of Agriculture and a number of other organizations you see on the right. And then we operate worldwide. We have networks throughout the US, you see on the left, through our institute from the Department of Agriculture. And then we operate internationally with many other centers focused on the same topic, but taking different approaches throughout Europe and the Far East. So I'm happy to chat on any of these collaborative efforts as well. So let me close here. I'll stop my talking at this point. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'd love to answer questions if any of the audience has questions. And I think I'll go to the chat box. Excuse me again. So I'm just going to read down the questions and answer them as I can, and please interrupt if anybody would like to speak up. Okay, so first question is, are the stem cells harvested from the animals? Yes, the stem cells are harvested from the animal. So those are the, if you will, the only animal component that ends up in the cell cultivated meats and foods we're talking about. So it's not a dumb question, very accurate question. You say to do this without the animal involved, but doesn't it ultimately go back to animal cells? Yes. So you still have animal cells in there, but you're not harming the animal in the process of producing large quantities of food. Other than an initial biopsy The animal is unharmed, goes off on its life, and everything else comes from growing those cells up. That's correct. How do you prevent contamination, either by accident or maliciously? The answer is, just like in pharmaceutical production, these bioreactors, regardless of what they're going to eventually look like, are really housed in very controlled environments. So it's not going to be on a family farm. It's not going to be in a livestock facility. It's not going to be in a processing plant like that. It's going to be in a very controlled, food safe environment. So the controls, the regulation, the detection of any contamination is very well controlled. The feeds are very consistent. And so you have much lower probability of a problem. Could you have a problem? Of course. But I will tell you, for example, to give you some confidence, of the 6 companies approved for sale for cell cultivated products today, mainly for different kinds of meats, none of those production processes use any antibiotics. And so this is a great first step to tell you how controlled the process is, because any contamination would lead to problems. And yet these can be done at the current scales in a very safe way. So we're very optimistic that the greater control of production will lead to much healthier quality foods. The next question is are there any animals that are easier or harder to work with? A really interesting question. Generally speaking, livestock species, things like chicken, cow, pig, turkey, are quite reasonable today to isolate cells and develop those cells to be productive for the process and to develop lower cost media to grow those cells. So I would say we're in a really good place for most of those products. Slightly harder are fish cells, although you saw Wild Type has approved salmon, but there's not a lot of other yet fish meat products on the market from this process, because some of those fish cells are difficult to grow without more expensive ingredients still. So there's still a lot of work to do there with cells that are isolated from different fish species. In the labs here at Tufts, we work with about 6 species, all of which work pretty well. Bluefin tuna, the mackerel cells, catfish, and a few others. So we're making pretty good progress there. I would say the most difficult cells still to work with are crustacean cells, which would be high value products like shrimp, lobster, and crab. Those remain extremely difficult to grow. You can isolate them, but they don't grow well. They take too long to grow, which means their costs will be prohibitive. So there's still a lot of work to do there on some of the crustacean cells for seafood products moving ahead. So more to come there. Next question. How does the source animal process work for existing or research or existing? Is it sourcing at the cell level like a biopsy, or sourcing process more aggressive, deadly for the animal? No, it is a biopsy. That's the only way it's done. There are some labs that use fertilized eggs to isolate cells. We do not here. We just use biopsies from muscle or fat, and all those animals have been fine after the biopsies. So never a problem. We even take our classes for our lab class. We take the students out to the Tufts farm so they can see the process and see how safe it is for the animal. And that's it. The biopsy comes back to the lab and we isolate the cells from there. Is it fair to say that right now there isn't an existing industry that's equipped or interested in producing these foods? No, I don't think that's fair to say. As I mentioned, there are in the US now 4 companies approved, most of which already have built some scale-up facilities, a couple in California, one in North Carolina. And all those processes are approved by both the FDA and the USDA for food safety. So, these foods are as safe, if not more safe, than anything you're consuming today, requiring 2 agencies for approval, which is unusual, but yet followed for this new emerging field. And so, no, companies are definitely involved. I think the challenge has been most of the companies that started 5 to 10 years ago thought they would be much farther along by today, 10 years later, than they are. And so they essentially overpromised where they'd be, which means investors have gotten cold feet, but that's true of any biotechnology field today. Investments are difficult. So the companies are being much more conservative about how quickly they're scaling and expanding because they need to raise funding to do that. I do think, as I said before, we still need public support, meaning public funding from the government to really make this a go. There is huge public funding in, as I mentioned, Singapore, in China, in Japan, in Korea, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Denmark, in Israel. So all these countries, because of their food import challenges, have really invested heavily in this technology. So we're hoping our government will see the same value to doing this, if nothing else for food security, but also for food quality and future food needs to feed everybody. But we will see. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there. Is it possible to take chicken cells and somehow convert them to beef? That's a great comment. Is it possible? Perhaps. We haven't done it. I haven't seen it done. I would argue the place to do that that's more feasible is probably fat cells from beef or chicken or cattle or cows, because fat cells, we have some evidence we can recontrol what the contents of fatty acids and volatiles are in those cells. So when you cook them, they'll smell like the different animal depending on the profile of fatty acids. So I think there's some possibility. How far that can be taken will be determined in the future, but I think it's a great concept because then you could have just one cell to make many different kinds of meats and so on, and that would be very efficient. What will happen to the farmers, small or large? Will they ultimately be out of business? No, I think it'll be completely the opposite. I think family farms, and larger farms, they're going to be needed in earnest for many reasons. One is to keep stocks of prized animals for sourcing cells by biopsy. So that's not going to go away. You always need that to drive future innovation. Number two, there's going to be a huge need for supply chains to feed the cells. So think of plants, plant residues, plant extracts, and waste materials from farms that get converted into value-added products to make the scaffolding and so on, all the things I talked about before. Those are only going to come from family farms or larger farms. And so supply chain inputs from farmers will only increase and provide opportunities for resources that currently are not available to these farms. I would argue that the use of those products will be immensely more efficient than they are today. For example, you feed a cow straw or other plant-based products grown on the farm, you're talking roughly somewhere around 10 to 15% efficient conversion or less into meat on the animal. Whereas by the technology we're talking about today, that's going to jump up to 50, possibly 75% efficient conversion into cell biomass to represent that food. So conversion efficiencies will go up. Supply chain needs and resources to farmers will go up. I see only positives in the future. Are there any ethics debate that I could summarize the points? There's of course many ethical debates, and we address those head on all the time. The first one that comes up is, do you want genetically engineered animal cells in your food? And the answer is it's up to the consumer. From the research standpoint, we work on both, meaning we make our materials, our foods without GMO or genetically modified organisms, the animal cells we talked about. In other cases, we make them with. You can do it much faster and more cost effective with genetic engineering, but you can do it both ways. I think what we see in the US in general is people are much more receptive to GMO foods. And in fact, the majority of foods we all eat today are already genetically modified, plants or animals. But nonetheless, these are issues that have to be addressed from a consumer standpoint. At Tufts, we do consumer surveys. This is done through colleagues at our nutrition school. And there's always a kind of a bell curve. Many people think it's fine, many people think it's not, and most are somewhere in the middle. And I think that's probably where we'll see for most of this. The same for vegetarians. Surveys done again by our nutrition school suggest some vegetarians say this is a great way to eat meat that otherwise they wouldn't eat meat because you're not harming the animal. Others say it's still an animal source cell, so we don't still want to eat it. And again, that's perfectly fine. I think there's going to be a lot of folks on both sides of that equation. So we will see. Next question, do you foresee doing the same thing with produce? Yes, I see it already, and not things we're doing in the lab here at Tufts, but there are companies out there already producing, I'm not sure I'd call it produce, but things like you're used to eating, things like coffee, things like chocolate, things like cinnamon. All these products from plants are already being produced by the same technology I'm talking about today. So instead of animal cell culture, we're using plant cell culture. And it works. There are products out there already that are being sold for these kinds of products. Why is that important? Because as you probably know, with food security, with resources in tropical areas getting more and more limited, the cost for these products go up and up. The land use is questionable, the loss of rainforests. And so if you could produce these in a controlled environment bioreactor, just like we talked about for the meats and other foods, this is a game changer for those fields as well. So you're going to see more and more of that, along with more traditional produce. So yes, I think that's a coming wave that we're just starting to see with the higher valued products, but you'll see it trickling down as costs come down and down. Excuse me. Next up for questions, how long are cell lines viable for production? Does it require regular sourcing of new biopsies? So great question as well. These are just amazing questions. Thank you all. So the first response there is the cell ag products to date have been approved both for kosher and both for halal. So thus far, there seems to be no religious sort of preference there. It seems to be okay for both. Oh, sorry, I jumped down too quick. So religious-wise, no issue that we've seen, approved in different countries to be acceptable. Back to cell lines, if you carry out the process the way I talked about today, the cells can be immortalized either naturally, we call that spontaneous immortalization, which happens frequently for many of the cells, or you can use genetic tools to immortalize them. And if you do that, the cells are available essentially forever. You control those cells, you freeze them down, and then they're used to grow the food each time. The benefit being there, the quality is always the same, et cetera. To do all that, we also have to track the cells for their quality. We have to track the genetics. We have to track what the cell's producing. And so those are all things we do in the program here to publish that information on cell stability and cell safety. Now, there are a few companies out there that decided to go with primary cell isolates from biopsies and grow their food from that. And can you do it? Yes. The challenge there is then every time you have to grow a new batch of food, you have to go back and get a new biopsy. And that's problematic in my mind for two reasons. One, you have to go back to the animal. We're trying to take animals, once they donate their cells, out of the equation. And number two, you run the challenge from a regulatory standpoint that every time you isolate cells, they're slightly different. And therefore, the food has to be reevaluated from a regulatory standpoint. So these are challenges, but people are working on these things, and we'll see, my expectation, there'll be many different sources of cells used, many products produced with different plant materials for the scaffolding I mentioned. And so you'll see, just like you see in the supermarket today, a whole line of different options that the consumers can choose or not choose depending on what they want to consume. Last question. Wow. Does the current government climate worry you? I don't want to get into politics, but absolutely worries me, because at least at the moment, these kind of future technologies that are here today, as I keep saying, but not scaled, are going to really require a large investment from government. And right now, there's no propensity for our current government to feel so invested. So we'll see what happens, right? So we have to continue to look for other sources of funding to drive the program. Obviously, as the economic climate improves, hopefully into next year, you'll see a lot of the startup companies I mentioned already that have approvals for their foods move forward with scaling further. And we can do all we want in the US, but we're going to be severely left behind because so many other countries are investing so heavily in this technology. So I'm hoping we get our act together quickly, but I don't know how to predict that at this point. So I think that's the end of our question. Yes?
Thank you, David. That was totally fascinating. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm ready for dinner. I'm Yvonne Bayevsky. I'm from the class of 1984, and I am the program chair of the Tufts Senior Connection. This was an amazing presentation, David. I can't wait to hear more. And let me just tell you that the Senior Connection has some fabulous programs coming up in the future for you. On October 7th at 10 a.m., we are going to the Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy and the Jean Mayer USDA Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging. This is an in-person event, and love to have you join us. And it's a chance to hear from just top-notch researchers and extremely special programs, so mark your calendars. Also, on January 28th, we will have a presentation with Tufts, conversation with Tufts University President Sunil Kumar. That's on January 28th, again at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And at the end of March, we will learn about climate change and the environment from Tufts Geology Professor Jack Ridge. These are just some of the upcoming programs. Also, I want to tell you that if you're interested in getting more involved with the Senior Connection, reach out to Karen McCauley and Rachel Shaul at Tufts Office of Alumni Engagement. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. It was fabulous. Have a great evening.